I'm Holly Higbee Jansen, and I teach Lightroom Quick Start and iPhone photography for the BPSOP School of Photography. I also teach workshops for Jansen photo expeditions. Today, we are going to be talking about 5 images from the BPSOP community. And let's get started. So our first picture today is by Carolyn T. Davis. It's titled Dubrovnik by the Sea. And this is what Carolyn says about this picture. As I walked up the wall around Dubrovnik, I looked back at this gorgeous view with the fort and waves crashing on the rocks. She shot it with her Nikon D800 with an f2.8 24-70 lens at 29 millimeters. Her settings were f13 at 1/200th of a second with a polarizing filter. This is a beautiful picture. Dubrovnik is one of my favorite places to photograph. And I love the color and the tone of this particular picture. And I have a couple of comments that might help you in the future. One thing I'm noticing is that the polarizing filter is really changing the color of your sky up here. So you can see how it's much darker than the rest of the sky, and you do have some glare over on this side, which is fine. I've actually gotten to the point where I use a polarizing filter for sure in this type of a situation where you're in an ocean or a sky situation, but just watch for what it's going to do as far as darkening in the sky area, because you can always do that in Lightroom. If you'd like to do a graduated filter in Lightroom, you can always change that, or you can always add definition to your sky that way. That's one of my favorite things about Lightroom, is that you can create way more definition in the sky. I'm not sure how much editing you've done with this particular picture. It looks to me like it could use some sharpening. If you shot it at f13, it really depends upon, as far as a landscape is concerned. I usually go with an f22, but it's really hard to see how far away the wall is from where you are. Like I said, I usually do f18, f22 in a landscape situation where you want the foreground all the way out to infinity in focus. Now the water here, if you were able to make your shutter speed a little bit higher, your waves down here could be a little bit crisper on the rocks. So maybe if you were able to up your ISO, then you'd be able to up your shutter speed to maybe around 5/100th of a second. Just an idea to increase the ISO. I know this camera pretty well. My husband shoots with it, and you can increase the ISO very effectively without creating noise in this particular camera. It's a great camera, by the way. As far as the composition is concerned, again, I'm not sure how much leeway you have as far as being able to move in this particular location. The composition, what I like to do in a landscape is to keep each of the elements separate. So for example, these rocks here and the wall are kind of encroaching on each other. So if it was possible that you could move over a little bit more to the left, then you'd be able to separate the rocks from the wall here, and possibly separate these two elements as well, those two rocks, to separate the elements. I love this location. I probably have a similar shot of this particular castle, I guess it is, in Dubrovnik as well. I love the fact that you've got the birds in there as well, and they're pretty sharp. But again, if you were to increase your shutter speed, this bird would actually be a little bit sharper also. So great job, and thank you for submitting to our photo critique. This next image is called On Uncharted Waters by Alexander Rotner. And this is what he says about it. I am working on a series of self and multi-self portraits reflecting the dreams, fantasies, and fears I amassed throughout my life. The presented characters are truly like actors in a tragic comedy of the theater of the absurd. I want to pair each picture with an evocative verse or two paralleling those images. My dilemma is how to present it. The text merged with images may give the impression of a graphic presentation instead of a work of art. I'm trying to allude to an icon look where text was often a part of the painting. The other way to include the writing would be to place it next to the photograph, but this would only work with a picture hanging in a gallery. If I try to send those photographs to a competition online, there would most likely be no place for such an addition. I'd like your opinion and suggestions on this topic, but of course the main reason I send this picture is to hear your critique. So this is quite an interesting compilation of different elements in this particular image. I think it's really creative. I love the characters and the expressions on the characters' faces. And you know, the water is great. That's quite a capture actually of the ocean itself. So it looks like maybe you have put together several images in a composite here. And so I have a couple of comments that might make it a little bit easier to read where you're going with it. Actually, the text I'm finding is hard to read, and possibly you could put the text in a, I don't know if you did this in Photoshop, probably, but maybe do the text in either a darker font or in a little in a layer that's you know, a top layer so that you can read it, and possibly change the color so that you can read the text a little bit more. I know you're trying to make the text a little bit more subtle, but it's hard to read. And then some of it is kind of busy. So I'm thinking that maybe if you made the border less transparent, that it would become a nice element to actually frame the picture. I think it's just makes it seem a little bit busy. Also in the background, sort of behind the balloon, I see a darker area that feels like maybe there was another element included in the image, and it's a bit distracting. So I'm thinking if you could kind of clean up a little bit of the distracting elements in it, it would be easier to read and easier to see where you're going with it. I like the, I guess they're like little bubbles. They almost feel like water, bubbles from the water. That's an interesting element. I might even fade those out just a little bit also, so it's not quite as distracting. But you're really telling a great story, and I'd love to see. It almost feels like it could be a calendar or a series of images, and maybe that's where you're going with it. But I like the tone and the start that you have with this. So great job and very creative. Thanks for submitting. Our next image we're going to talk about is called Anemone Clownfish, Red Sea, Egypt, and it's by Diana Spitzley. This is a family of clownfish. The black and white fish in the background are juveniles. I used a Canon S100 with an underwater case, f4.0, 1/200th of a second at ISO 200, and white balance set on a white balance card. I think it would have been better if the large clownfish was a bit more central in the image and a bit sharper. I would definitely agree with you on that, Diana, and I have maybe a solution for you. What I'm finding is it's this image, when I go to it, my question for you is, what is the subject? And you have actually said this in your description, what the subject is. But what exactly is the foreground and the background doing in this particular image? Are the other family members adding to the image, or are they distracting elements? And what could you add or take away from this image to make it a stronger image? So I am seeing some distracting elements in both the composition and exposure because of the real bright areas back here. It's hard to tell right off the bat whether or not that's sand or whether there's other fish, and it's hard to even see what these elements are right here. So what I'd like to do is show you a little bit of a few things that I might do in Lightroom to bring out some more to bring out some color and some sharpness in this particular picture. So usually in Lightroom, I will start with the basic module and play around with the exposure and the contrast to see what I can bring out in this image. And as I start to do this, it's very clear to me that your adult clownfish really is the subject of your picture. It's very hard to actually bring out any detail in these guys back here. So even if I was to use some clarity, you can see how with the clarity slider it's bringing in some detail in this coral, and vibrance is bringing out color in our clownfish. I try to stay away from using the saturation slider too much. Vibrant, I prefer to use vibrance. In the tone curve, I can maybe bring down some of the highlights, but that's not really affecting this area right here. That's more of my concern. The darks, again, aren't really going to be affecting that area too much. The shadows, same thing. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my detail palette and really just bring up the sharpening on here. And you can see again, Mr. Clownfish looks pretty good, and um, so does the coral here. But again, his family isn't looking so good. Even if I bring in some noise reduction. So then if I go down and do some post-crop vignetting, again, that's going to bring your eye more towards the clownfish, and these guys are not really adding to the picture. So what I would suggest to do would be to maybe crop it down so that the clownfish becomes your main subject here. So I'm not sure what the resolution is on that particular picture, but if you crop it to something like this, it becomes really quite interesting, where you get the detail in the coral, you can see his face and his fins, versus if you go back to this particular image, you're still kind of going back here and saying, okay, what is the subject of my image? And I think this really would work better if you really made Mr. Clownfish your subject. So great picture, and I know it's really challenging to do underwater photography, but the lighting is really good here, and I think you've got a good composition if you just kind of work with it a little bit. So thank you for submitting, and keep shooting. Our next image is called Loon Taking Flight, and it's by Jeffrey Legros. And this is what Jeffrey has to say about this picture. This was just a matter of being in the right place at the right time with my camera ready. I was out on the dock watching an eagle out on the island in front of our cottage when this loon decided to take flight right in front of our dock. Date was October 7th at 9:59 a.m. Taken with the Nikon D90 at ISO 2000, 270 millimeter f/16 at 1/200th of a second. I love the color and the action and the fact that you were able to capture this bird in flight right in front of you. So great to be ready at this particular point. I think this is one of those shots where you just had to be ready to take it, and so to think quickly and to be able to change shutter speeds and that sort of thing, I think would be a little difficult. But in a perfect world, I would probably raise the shutter speed just a little bit so that he would be not quite so blurry, and then that would lower your f-stop a little bit too, which would help with that. And then also in post-processing, I think I would play around a little bit with the saturation and the colors, because you have these beautiful fall colors reflected in the water, and we could just alter the composition just a little bit so it's not quite so centered. So I'll show you a few things that you could do in Lightroom. I teach the Lightroom Quick Start class, and so I can show you how I would go through this particular image in Lightroom. And I work with Lightroom pretty quickly. That's why I teach the Quick Start class. So I always start with the basic module, adjust exposure a little bit, contrast. You can see already that it's bringing out some of the saturation in the reflections, highlights. Now I'm looking at the water right now, so I'm bringing down the highlights so we're not going to have any blowouts in the highlights. The shadows I might just bring up just a little bit. Again, I'm playing with the whites and then the blacks, just so that it looks um, a little bit more saturated. Clarity is going to bring in a little bit more focus. Vibrance, I like vibrance better than saturation because it's going to bring in some enhancement to the color without oversaturating it. Saturation, in this particular case, I think I would just leave it. Tone curve I like to play with just because it does affect things a little bit differently than the basic module. So I'll go through and kind of play with the different elements in the tone curve, bring up some of the shadows. I would definitely sharpen this. I usually do about 90 to 100% sharpening, and then I can test the radius and the detail in a sharpening just so you can start to see the outline of your image. Noise reduction I would bring up just a little bit. You can follow the noise reduction in this panel right here. Then as far as effects, I would do some post-crop vignetting. So again, it's going to bring your eye more towards the center of the image. And I do like the way that looks now. We can also actually just highlight this guy a little bit and actually do some selective editing. And I would work with the exposure module here and make sure that my feathering is up on this particular module. Play around with just maybe brightening him a little bit. So again, your eye is going to go right to him and the reflection here. So I can actually adjust the size of this adjustment and play with some sharpness. And then I might actually just crop it just a little bit so it's not quite so centered. So if you look at my finished version of this particular picture, I kind of like it a little bit off-centered. You can see how you can really see the droplets of water now, and you can see where he's going off into the left side of the frame. So great image, and love the fact that you caught this right at the right moment. So thank you for submitting. Our next image was taken in a rainy night in Lake Como, Italy. It was taken with the Sony a6000 with a 55mm f1.8 lens. And it was done by SAIF. And so that's all the information I have about this particular image. And I have brought it up on Lightroom so we can talk about it. And let's see if there's any other information on this. No, it's just called Lake Como Bike. And I love the great sense of place that this image gives you. You definitely have the feeling that it's in Europe. I love the light and the contrast and the shadows. The reflections in this particular image are great. And so I think it looks great on its own, really. If I was to add some Lightroom editing to it, there's a few little things that I might do to really enhance the subject of this particular piece. So in my mind, you know, if you ask yourself when you're editing an image or when you're actually shooting an image, you know, what is the subject of my picture? What's really important here? And I can see that the bicycle to me would be the subject of the image, and of course the light and the shadows and the reflections. So that would be, if I was to make any editing adjustments in that, it would be to highlight the bicycle and actually enhance the lighting in this particular image. So when I work with Lightroom, I teach the Lightroom Quick Start class, and so my version of Lightroom would be to be able to go through it quickly and efficiently and really do the best that you possibly could with your image quite quickly. So I would go into the basic develop module and I play around with all of the sliders just to see which ones are going to affect this the best. So highlights I might bring down just a little bit to take the glare off the lights. Shadows, in this particular case, I would probably want to enhance the shadows. So you can see this great shadow over here, these nice reflections here. Again, kind of play around with the whites and the blacks, that what's going to bring out the most interest. Now you can see if I increase the clarity that this is going to enhance some of these shadows, some of these reflections here, the vibrance. Saturation, I usually don't do much with saturation. You can see if I just touch it a little, it really sends this picture more into the yellow. And the reason why it's looking yellow is because of the nature of the light. Tone curves, I would play around with that also, just to see how that's going to affect your image. Again, with the lights, I'm looking at the lights and the darks here in particular to see how we can adjust these. So in this picture, actually, I might actually go down and darken it just a little bit. And then I can go into my selective tool and actually highlight the bicycle. Okay, so then I can go into this bicycle and just give it some highlights so that it brings that out as the subject without being too obvious. Maybe I'll take down a little bit of the yellow tone in it and bring up the clarity. And then I would actually do some sharpening here. And do a little post-crop vignetting. So you can see that we still have a lot of the basic tools that we were working with before. If you go, you can go over here to the YY, and it compares the original to the one that I just did. And basically what I've done is I've just sort of sharpened it up a little bit and brought out the highlights in the bicycle. And if we look at that, that's the original. And I'm sorry, this is the original, and this is the new version of it. So I think this is a great image, great job, and enjoy on your next travels with your camera. Thank you.